Get out right now. We don't serve people like you here." The words shot out of the manager's mouth like a knife, sharp and public, ringing across the marble floor of a Fifth Avenue luxury store. That single sentence froze the entire room. Shoppers turned their heads. Phones went up. The humiliation was deliberate, and it was loud enough that no one could pretend they hadn't heard it. Before I take you into this story, comment where you're watching from. Subscribe and hit like, because what you're about to hear will stay with you. Now, let's return to that moment, because the man who was being pushed out was not just a random customer in worn jeans and a hoodie. He was Elijah Thompson, a 38-year-old black CEO who controlled a $4 billion investment fund. Just yesterday, his company had acquired 60% of the very store that was now humiliating him. He walked in undercover, not to shop, but to test the truth he had long suspected, that the store was rotting from the inside with prejudice. It was August 15th, just before 3 in the afternoon. The sun was blazing outside Fifth Avenue, but inside Harrington's luxury emporium. The light was all chandeliers and glass cases glistening with diamond watches. Prices started at $50,000 and climbed to nearly $100,000. The air smelled of Italian leather, heavy perfume, and the kind of money that had no patience for anyone who didn't look the part. Elijah entered quietly, hands in his pockets, sneakers scuffed, hoodie faded. He looked nothing like the executives who normally came through those doors. But everything about his presence was intentional. He wanted to feel, firsthand, what customers who didn't fit the image were forced to endure. His late mother had once been thrown out of a store like this, told she didn't belong. He never forgot the tears she wiped away with dignity she didn't deserve to lose. Today, he walked in carrying her memory like armor. The first test came at the watch counter. Elijah leaned against the glass, eyes on a sleek Audemars Piguet that gleamed under the spotlight with a $95,000 price tag. His request was calm, polite. "Excuse me, I'd like to see that one." The young associate, Sophia Ramirez, glanced at him and smirked. She had grown up in Queens, fought her way into this job, and was under constant pressure to hit sales quotas. But the training, the subtle nudges from her manager, had taught her to size customers up by appearance, and to her. Elijah didn't look like a man with money. "That watch is $95,000, she said, her tone dripping with doubt. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable with something under 10. Her words landed like a slap, a reminder that to her, he was already boxed into poverty. Elijah's voice never wavered. "I understand the price. I'd like to see it." But she didn't move. Her hesitation was loud enough for the surrounding shoppers to notice. Then came Karen Mitchell, the store manager, a white woman in her mid-40s. Her face carried the stress of a failing marriage and a daughter's addiction battle. Life had hardened her, and she had grown bitter, seeing threats where there were none, testing her power on the vulnerable. She stepped between Elijah and the counter, her voice cold, her presence sharp. "If you can't prove financial capability, you need to leave," she declared, making sure everyone nearby could hear. The cruelty wasn't hidden. It was broadcast. Every customer in earshot understood this man was being singled out for how he looked. Her eyes scanned him with disdain, pausing on his sneakers like they were evidence of a crime. Standing at the edge of the store was Jamal Harris, a black security guard in his early 40s, a former Marine. He had fought wars abroad but was still fighting a different kind at home, being seen as less than. His uniform made him part of the system, and though his heart twisted at the sight, duty pulled him forward. "Sir," he said softly, almost apologetically, "please leave." His words weren't cruel, but they carried the same weight. It was the final push, and that's when a teenager in the corner, phone out, began live streaming. The caption read, "Drama at Harrington's." Within seconds, dozens were watching, then hundreds. The world outside began to seep in. Elijah's phone buzzed. A message reminder. His meeting upstairs at Thompson Ventures was in 15 minutes. He straightened, eyes steady on the manager. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply said, "You'll regret this," before turning for the door. His Lamborghini keys jingled in his pocket as if to underline the irony, but no one inside cared to notice. The door shut behind him, and the staff exhaled as if a stain had been scrubbed from their polished floors. They didn't know the cameras had captured every second, that the world was about to learn who they had just humiliated. And here lies the cruelest irony. The people who had pushed him out were fighting to protect an elite image, blind to the fact that Elijah was not only their customer, but their owner. The moment he stepped out, the live stream's numbers shot up, 500, then 1,000 viewers. Hashtags began to form. Outside the store, pedestrians stopped to stare at the commotion as the young TikTok user narrated the scene in real time. "Can you believe this? They're kicking a man out because of his hoodie on 5th Avenue. This is insane." Inside, Karen tried to calm her shaking hands. Sophia hid behind the counter. Jamal stood still, his conscience gnawing. They didn't know that their words, their choices, were about to ignite a storm they could not contain. Part 1 of this story doesn't end with a resolution. It ends with humiliation and silence. A man wronged but unbroken. A staff clinging to false authority. A crowd just beginning to realize what they had witnessed. Tomorrow would bring the revelation, the firings, the reforms, and the justice no one inside Harrington saw coming. But in that moment, the lesson was already clear. Prejudice speaks loud, but truth waits patiently, ready to answer louder. And Elijah Thompson had waited long enough. By the time Elijah Thompson reached the private elevator that connected Harrington's luxury emporium to the offices of Thompson Ventures above, the sting of what had just happened had already begun to transform into something sharper, something purposeful. He pulled the hoodie from his shoulders, folded it neatly over his arm, and pressed the button to ascend. The reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall no longer showed a man in faded jeans and scuffed sneakers. It showed a disciplined CEO in a tailored charcoal suit, tie knotted with precision, the quiet confidence of someone who had built a $4 billion fund from nothing. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he stepped into the glass-walled boardroom overlooking 5th Avenue, where his legal counsel Patricia Chen and operations director Michael Lee were already waiting. Patricia's face was tense, her phone lit with notifications. "Elijah," she said without greeting. "The live stream is exploding. 15,000 views in the first 5 minutes. It's already spreading on TikTok, Instagram, and X." She pushed her tablet across the table. On the screen, the video replayed, Karen Mitchell's voice, sharp and unmistakable. "If you can't prove financial capability, you need to leave." The comments were pouring in faster than they could be read. Hashtags like hashtag Harrington's shame and hashtag luxury, for some were climbing the trending charts. Michael, joining via video from Chicago, chimed in, "This is the perfect storm. We've been tracking 28 documented incidents of discrimination at Harrington's in the past 4 months alone. Those cases have already cost us a 15% revenue decline, about $5 million annually, and now, with this video going viral, the damage multiplies by the hour." Elijah didn't sit immediately. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the crowd gathering outside the store entrance. News vans were beginning to arrive, cameras pointed at the glass facade. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just yesterday, Thompson Ventures had finalized the acquisition of a controlling stake in Harrington's. Today, the store was being shamed publicly under his watch. "This," Elijah said quietly, "is exactly why we bought it, to expose the truth, and to change it." Patricia's expression softened, but she remained firm. "Change is one thing, but we need to act quickly. New York civil rights law allows for fines up to $200,000 per violation. Multiply that by the complaints already filed, and we're looking at potential damages of over $5 million. And that doesn't include the lawsuits waiting to surface now that this video has gone global. Meanwhile, in her cramped office below, Karen Mitchell sat hunched over her desk, watching her phone light up with messages. A fellow manager from the Madison Avenue branch had texted, "You're trending on TikTok, not in a good way." Her hands trembled as she dialed Alexander Harrington, the founder and patriarch who had built the store into an empire over 4 decades. His voice was weak, raspy from chemotherapy treatments in the Hamptons. "Karen, calm down," he said. "It can't be that bad." But when she played him the clip over speakerphone, the silence on the other end was damning. "We're in trouble," Alexander whispered finally, almost to himself. "Real trouble." Sophia Ramirez, the sales associate, had locked herself in the break room, tears smudging her makeup. She had only been with the store a year, fighting to support her parents and younger brother. She scrolled frantically through articles on her phone about retail discrimination lawsuits, her chest tightening as she realized her name might soon be plastered across the internet. She thought of her grandmother, who had once been denied service in Mexico because of her indigenous features. Sophia had promised herself she would never make another person feel that way. Yet here she was, part of the very system she once despised, in the security office. Jamal Harris sat with his head in his hands. He had followed orders, but every fiber of his being told him it was wrong. As a Marine, he had been trained to protect the vulnerable. As a black man, he knew too well what it felt like to be singled out. His reflection on the blank monitor in front of him was almost unbearable. He wondered if the uniform he wore had made him complicit in a cruelty he swore he'd never enforce. Back in the boardroom, Elijah pulled out a slim folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a set of 3 printed scenarios, each with projected financial outcomes. He spoke with the measured cadence of a man who had rehearsed this moment for years. Option 1. Shut the store down completely. We lose $2.5 million in rent per year, but we cut the rot out at the root. Option 2. Do nothing and face lawsuits. That means at least $600,000 in legal fees, plus years of reputational damage. Option 3. Comprehensive reform. Fire the staff involved, mandate training for the rest, and commit $150,000 in donations to civil rights organizations. It will sting at first, but long-term, it positions Harrington's as a leader in equity. Michael leaned forward on the screen, nodding. "Elijah, inclusivity isn't just the moral choice, it's good business. Research shows companies that lead in diversity outperform competitors by 25% in revenue growth. Right now, non-white customers face 92% worse treatment than white customers in luxury retail. If we fix that, we don't just survive this storm, we grow," Patricia added. "And if we don't fix it, the state attorney general will make us fix it. The law is on their side." Elijah finally took his seat, clasping his hands on the polished oak table. His face was calm, but his words carried a weight that left no room for hesitation. "We didn't buy Harrington's to protect it. We bought it to transform it. Today, we show the world that discrimination carries a price tag. Tomorrow, we show them reform pays dividends." His phone buzzed again. The live stream had crossed 50,000 viewers. Outside, the crowd on Fifth Avenue swelled, news anchors rehearsing lines into microphones. Inside the store, Karen's voice shook as she tried to reassure Sophia and Jamal that everything would be fine, though she didn't believe her own words. Part 2 ends not with resolution, but with escalation. A viral storm gathers strength by the minute. A store once known for its glittering chandeliers now shines under the harsh spotlight of public judgment. And while Elijah sits above it all, calm and resolute, the staff below scramble in fear, unaware that their fates are already being written in the boardroom. Tomorrow, their world will collapse in a single email. But tonight, the internet roars louder than any chandelier could ever sparkle, and the name Harrington's is no longer synonymous with luxury. It is synonymous with shame. At precisely 5 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, the revelation spread like wildfire. An internal email from Thompson Ventures hit the inboxes of every employee at Harrington's luxury emporium. And for the first time in their careers, the staff learned that the man they had just humiliated was not only their customer, but their new boss. His name, Elijah Thompson, glowed in bold letters across the screen. Introduced as the CEO of Thompson Ventures and the controlling shareholder of the Harrington brand. The words were undeniable, effective immediately. Thompson Ventures held 60% of the company's ownership, and all employees were to recognize Elijah as the final authority. In her office, Karen Mitchell dropped her phone to the floor. The world around her blurred, the walls closing in, her mind racing to her daughter's treatment costs, her pending divorce, the mortgage that clung to her neck like a weight. She saw her 18 years of service vanish in a single heartbeat. She had thought she was protecting the store's image, but in truth, she had been signing her own termination notice in front of the entire internet. In the break room, Sofia Ramirez clutched her chest, gasping as she scrolled through the flood of social media posts, replaying her dismissive smirk. She had never meant to carry cruelty in her tone. Yet there it was, replayed endlessly with comments branding her as heartless and prejudiced. Tears streaked her face as she thought of her grandmother back in Mexico, who had taught her to never judge others for their appearance. How could she have forgotten that lesson? She buried her face in her hands, the humiliation cutting deeper than any reprimand could. Meanwhile, in the security office, Jamal Harris leaned back in his chair, staring at the monitor with a hollow expression. He had followed orders, told the man to leave, but the guilt now burned hotter than ever. He was a Marine, a man who had fought for freedom. Yet in that moment, he had helped enforce prejudice rather than protect against it. He opened a blank document on his desktop, his fingers hovering above the keyboard as he started updating his resume. He had been loyal, but he knew loyalty was no shield when the winds of reform swept through. Upstairs in the glass boardroom, Elijah sat across from Patricia Chen and Michael Lee, his voice steady but carrying the weight of decades of lived pain. "When I was 12, he said, my mother was thrown out of a store just like this. They told her she didn't belong, that her money wasn't good enough because her skin was black. I watched her walk away with dignity, but I swore that one day I'd come back for every child who ever saw their parent humiliated like that. This is not just business to me. This is personal." His words hung in the air, each syllable deliberate, every pause filled with the gravity of memory. Patricia looked at him with quiet respect, nodding slowly. "Elijah, the law is on your side this time. New York can fine up to $200,000 per violation, and with 28 cases on record, that's more than $5 million in penalties alone, and that doesn't include the damages from class action lawsuits. If we act decisively now, we turn this liability into a foundation for reform." On the video screen, Michael leaned closer. "And let's not forget the upside. If we make Harrington's the model for inclusivity in luxury retail, we could increase revenue by 28% within a year. Right now, the brand bleeds from arrogance. But humility and fairness? That's worth billions in goodwill." Elijah pressed his palms flat on the table, his voice dropping into a register that allowed no dissent. "Then we do not hesitate. Every staff member involved in today's incident must be removed. No half measures, no excuses. Discrimination is not a mistake. It's a decision, and decisions have consequences." As he spoke, The live stream from TikTok crossed 10,000 live viewers. The chat scrolling so fast it was unreadable. Outside the store, a crowd had swelled on Fifth Avenue. Reporters shoved microphones into the faces of passing pedestrians, demanding reactions. "It's shocking," one woman said. "This is 2024 and they're still doing this?" Another man, holding his young son by the hand, shook his head. "They threw him out because he wore sneakers, and he owns the place? That's justice waiting to happen." News anchors rehearsed their scripts as police began managing the flow of the crowd inside the Emporium. The once calm air had turned suffocating. Karen sat frozen in her chair, her mind flashing to her daughter's face, wondering how she would tell her the job was gone. Sophia scrolled endlessly through hate messages online, each one slicing at her fragile sense of self. Jamal stared blankly at the badge on his uniform, questioning if he had betrayed not just Elijah but himself. Back in the boardroom, Elijah lifted his phone, reading aloud the email he was about to send. "Effective immediately. All staff involved in today's incident are to be terminated without delay. Human Resources will issue notices before the close of business. New training will be mandatory for the entire workforce. A diversity and equity board will be established within 30 days. And this store, from this day forward, will serve as a model for every other in the chain." His thumb hovered, then pressed send. The decision was irreversible. The ripple had begun. In the Hamptons. Alexander Harrington sat listening to the chaos through his speakerphone. His voice was frail, but his words were clear. "Elijah, I built this store on prestige. I never thought it would come to this. But my son married a woman of color, and I've seen how she was treated, even in my own circles. Maybe it's time. Maybe you're right." Elijah didn't hesitate. "Not maybe. Alexander, this is the future. Luxury can no longer mean exclusion. It must mean excellence. For everyone." Downstairs, phones buzzed with the same notification. Termination letters arriving in inboxes with subject lines too blunt to ignore. Karen opened hers, her eyes filling with tears. Sophia read hers and crumpled against the break room wall, sobbing silently. Jamal saw his warning notice and closed his resume file, conflicted but relieved that he would at least keep his job. For now, by the end of the hour. The staff knew their world had changed forever. The chandeliers still glittered, the leather still perfumed the air, but the foundation of Harrington's had cracked wide open. On the streets outside, chants from protesters began to rise, blending with the roar of traffic and the flashing lights of news cameras. Online, the hashtag Harrington's shame dominated the evening, climbing past celebrity gossip and political headlines. The nation was watching, and the message was unmistakable. A man who had been humiliated was now rewriting the rules. Part 3 closes with the weight of revelation pressing on every corner of the store. The staff, once confident in their authority, now sat trembling, stripped of their power. The customers, once oblivious, now watched with sharpened eyes. And Elijah Thompson, once a boy who watched his mother walk away in pain, now stood as the man who would not only punish but transform. His words echoed in the boardroom as the live stream continued its march across millions of screens. Fire them today. Reform begins now. By 3:45 that afternoon, the tension inside Harrington's had reached a breaking point. What had started as a humiliating moment for one man had now grown into a national scandal, with reporters swarming outside, social media burning with outrage, and lawyers preparing statements. Inside the glass-walled boardroom above the store, the decision that would change the company forever was about to be sealed. Elijah Thompson sat at the head of the long oak table, his posture straight, his voice steady, though every word carried the weight of a man who had seen this pain before and vowed never to let it pass unanswered. Across from him, Patricia Chen laid out the legal documents, her tone precise. Elijah, we must move swiftly. Under Title VII and Section 1981 of Federal Civil Rights Law, the exposure here could cripple the brand. Each claim could cost up to $300,000 in damages. Multiply that by the documented cases, and we're looking at millions. Acting decisively isn't just moral, it's survival. Beside her, Michael Lee joined from Chicago via video, his voice urgent. The data is clear. When a company faces public scandal, delay equals destruction. Competitors seize the moment. But if we reform visibly and immediately, we could flip this. Customers will see Harrington's not as a store that discriminated, but as a store that admitted its fault and transformed. Elijah nodded, then spoke slowly, every syllable deliberate. Then the course is simple. Karen Mitchell must be terminated today. Sophia Ramirez suspended and retrained. Jamal Harris warned but retained, because unlike the others, he showed hesitation. And we mandate 50 hours of diversity and equity training for all employees within 30 days. Beyond that, we create a permanent diversity board and a public dashboard of customer feedback. We will donate $150,000 to civil rights organizations to prove this is not just a press stunt. And from this moment forward, Harrington's will stand for excellence, not exclusion. In the Hamptons. Alexander Harrington listened over speakerphone, his frail voice carrying both pride and resignation. For 40 years, I thought prestige meant protecting an image, but prestige without fairness is poison. My father taught me to guard this store like a jewel, but perhaps the greater jewel is the legacy we leave behind. Elijah, if you lead this, then let it be so. You have my full consent. The words landed like a final passing of the torch. Patricia slid the termination papers across the table. Elijah signed with one firm stroke. At that moment, Karen Mitchell's long career ended. Downstairs, the atmosphere was suffocating. Karen sat alone in her office when the email notification chimed. Her hands shook as she clicked. The words were brutal in their clarity. Effective immediately. Your employment with Harrington's Luxury Emporium has been terminated. Her stomach dropped. She thought of her daughter in rehab, the bills waiting at home, the years of loyalty she believed would protect her. Tears blurred the screen, and she whispered, 18 years. Gone. She had built her authority on intimidation, but now the power she wielded had turned against her. In the break room, Sophia read her suspension letter. She was not fired, but she would be without pay for 30 days and required to undergo mandatory retraining. Her heart sank. Shame, heavier than fear, pressed down on her shoulders. She remembered her grandmother's lessons about dignity, and the memory made her punishment feel both just and unbearable. She slid the letter into her bag, promising herself she would return, changed. Jamal, meanwhile, opened his notice with trembling hands. Relief washed over him when he saw he had only been issued a formal warning. The words acknowledged his hesitation, his quiet resistance. For the first time all day, he allowed himself to exhale. He knew he had narrowly escaped the fate of his colleagues, and now he had a chance to prove himself worthy of the uniform he wore. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the reform documents were signed and sealed. Elijah leaned back in his chair, exhaustion visible but determination unshaken. "This is not the end," he said. "This is the beginning. We cannot erase what happened today, but we can ensure it never happens again." Patricia closed the folder, her voice calm but firm. "Then it's settled. Harrington's will stand as a case study in accountability." Outside the boardroom, staff whispered anxiously as HR representatives delivered the official letters. The chandeliers above still sparkled, but beneath their glow, the old order crumbled. The image of invincible authority that Karen once embodied dissolved, replaced by the quiet resolve of a new leadership. News spread quickly through the ranks. Karen was gone. Sophia suspended. Jamal spared but warned. Some employees felt fear. Others felt relief. A few, like Jennifer Walsh, felt hope that perhaps the store might finally become a place where fairness mattered more than appearances. Downstairs, as the terminated and suspended processed their fates, Elijah prepared his next move. He knew reform was not just about punishing the guilty, but about building a new foundation. He outlined to Patricia and Michael the pillars of change: customer experience audits, mystery shoppers of diverse backgrounds, employee scorecards tied to inclusivity, and an independent community advisory board. Dr. Elena Vasquez, an expert in diversity training, was already en route to oversee the transformation. Elijah's plan was not cosmetic. It was systemic. At 4:15 in the afternoon, word leaked to the press that firings had already taken place. Outside, the crowd erupted with cheers. Protesters holding signs against discrimination smiled as journalists reported the breaking news live on air. Harrington's Luxury Emporium has fired staff following today's viral incident, with new ownership promising sweeping reforms. The internet caught fire again, this time not with outrage but with cautious praise. Commentators called it the swiftest accountability move in luxury retail history. Inside, Karen gathered her belongings in silence. She walked through the store she had once ruled, her steps heavy, her eyes avoiding the cameras flashing outside the glass walls. Sophia, pale and shaken, slipped out the side door, avoiding reporters, her future uncertain but her conscience awakened. Jamal stayed at his post, his jaw set, determined to prove that next time he would stand on the right side of justice. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the decision was final, the old order gone. Harrington's was no longer the store it had been that morning, and Elijah Thompson, once humiliated in front of strangers, now stood as the architect of transformation. The decisions had been made, the papers signed, the staff reshaped. What came next would test not just the company, but the industry. But for now. Part 4 closed with a single truth. The storm had not broken Harrington's. It had rebuilt it. And in the silence that followed the firings, the air inside the Emporium felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but charged with the possibility of change. At 4:15 that same afternoon, the wheels of reform began to turn in real time. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a nationally recognized diversity and inclusion expert, arrived at Harrington's carrying a laptop, a stack of binders, and the kind of calm authority that comes only from years of rebuilding broken systems. She was escorted straight to the boardroom, where Elijah outlined the new directives. "Dr. Vasquez," he said firmly, "from this moment on, every staff interaction will be monitored, reviewed, and scored. We will not just lecture about equity. We will live it." Within an hour, new feedback systems were being installed at the store's entrances. Digital kiosks where customers could rate their experience anonymously in real time. Shoppers leaving with purchases of handbags and watches stopped curiously to tap their impressions. The system fed directly into a live dashboard upstairs, ensuring that management could no longer hide patterns of prejudice. By 5 o'clock in the evening, Elijah himself walked the store floor for the first time as the rightful owner, his presence sending ripples of unease through employees still processing the events of the day. He gathered them near the grand staircase, his tone measured but sharp. "Every customer who enters these doors is equal," he declared. "From today forward, no one will be dismissed because of their skin color, their clothes, or their accent. If you believe otherwise, you no longer belong here." Silence filled the air. Some employees shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded with visible relief. Jennifer Walsh, a young associate who had long felt overshadowed by harsher colleagues, raised her chin slightly, as though the words had unlocked a strength she had been waiting to use, as part of the immediate reforms. A mystery shopper was sent in to test the staff at 5:30. A black woman in her 30s, dressed in casual jeans and a simple blouse, entered the store and asked to see a luxury handbag priced at nearly $20,000. Jennifer Walsh greeted her warmly, smiled without hesitation, and offered to bring out not just the requested bag, but two others for comparison. She explained the craftsmanship, the materials, and even offered a private fitting room for comfort, upstairs. Elijah watched the interaction live through the new feedback system, his jaw tightening at first but softening when he saw Jennifer's care. The customer left satisfied, rating her experience a 4.5 out of 5. For Elijah, it was proof that the culture could be changed, if only the right people were empowered. By 6 o'clock in the evening, a press conference was held on the steps of Harrington's, cameras flashing as reporters jostled for position. Alexander Harrington appeared briefly, frail but dignified, admitting the failure. "Our brand has stumbled," he said, "but we will rise by embracing change." Then Elijah stepped to the microphone, his voice calm but commanding. "This store belongs to every customer who enters it," he said. "Discrimination is not only immoral, it is unprofitable, it is unsustainable, and it ends today. Staff responsible for today's incident are no longer with us. Effective immediately. We are implementing sweeping reforms. We will be transparent. We will be accountable, and we will be better." His words echoed across the crowd, carried live on national television and streamed to millions online. Social media erupted with praise. Headlines read, "Tech CEO exposes bias, leads retail change." Even critics admitted that the speed of accountability was rare in corporate America. Inside, reforms continued with military precision. By 7 o'clock in the evening, Dr. Vasquez conducted the first emergency training session for remaining employees. She began with a story of her own, being denied service as a young Latina student in a store that decided she was not worthy. She paused, letting the silence weigh on the staff. "Bias is not an accident," she said. "It's a decision you make in the space between perception and action. From tonight on, you will learn to choose differently." The staff listened, some nodding, some staring at the floor. Jamal Harris, the security guard, raised his hand and admitted his guilt. "I knew it was wrong, but I followed orders. I won't make that mistake again." Dr. Vasquez acknowledged him with a firm nod. "Acknowledgement is the first step. Now you must prove it." By 8 o'clock in the evening, customer feedback from the new kiosks showed early signs of improvement. One shopper wrote, "Tonight felt different. Staff smiled, they helped, they listened. It felt human again." Another added, "I never thought I'd step foot in Harrington's, but after today, I feel like I should." The numbers began to tell a story, small but meaningful progress in a single day. Elijah reviewed the data with Patricia and Michael, pointing at the screen. "This is the proof we need. Not press releases, not speeches, real experiences, measured, documented, undeniable." As the evening wore on, Elijah remained in the store, walking aisle to aisle, speaking quietly with employees, shaking hands with customers. Some staff avoided his gaze, ashamed of the scandal. Others, like Jennifer Walsh, looked him directly in the eye and thanked him. "I've wanted to work in a place where fairness mattered," she said softly. "Maybe now we have a chance." Elijah smiled faintly. "We do, Jennifer, and people like you will lead the way." At 9 o'clock in the evening, as the store closed for the night, Elijah stood once more at the grand staircase, watching the chandeliers glitter above him. For years, those lights had symbolized exclusion, a barrier between privilege and humanity. Tonight, for the first time, They felt like they belonged to everyone. Outside. The crowd had thinned, but the news vans still hummed. Their cameras pointed at the glass facade that had become a symbol of shame and redemption. Part 5 ends not with the quiet of closure, but with the hum of transformation. Firings had been carried out. Reforms had begun. Trust was being tested and rebuilt in real time. Elijah knew the journey was only beginning. The headlines tonight would praise him. The internet would celebrate him. But tomorrow the real work would continue. Harrington's was no longer just a store. It was a case study in justice. And as Elijah left the building at 10 o'clock in the evening, his reflection in the glass doors seemed to whisper the promise he had made to his mother decades ago. Never again would dignity be denied under his watch. Within 30 days of that explosive afternoon, the transformation of Harrington's luxury emporium was no longer just a headline or a viral video. It was a lived reality, unfolding day by day on Fifth Avenue. The changes were visible from the moment a customer approached the glass facade. New signage at the entrance proudly declared, "Every guest, every time, equal service guaranteed." Inside, the atmosphere that once dripped with quiet hostility toward those who didn't look the part now hummed with cautious warmth. The chandeliers still sparkled. The leather still perfumed the air. But the tension had been replaced by a sense of watchful accountability. Dr. Elena Vasquez had rolled out the mandatory 50-hour diversity training program, and every single employee had completed it under strict monitoring. The sessions were intense, not just corporate jargon, but raw stories of discrimination, role-playing exercises, and direct challenges that forced staff to confront the prejudices they carried. At first, there was resistance, eye rolls, sighs, whispers about wasting time. But as the weeks passed, many began to shift, realizing that this was not optional, not a box to check, but a new way of life. Sofia Ramirez returned after her 30-day suspension with humility etched across her face. She had spent her time off not only completing the training modules, but also volunteering at a community center in Queens, where she heard countless stories from immigrants, workers, and single parents who had been denied service, respect, and dignity. Those voices haunted her, and when she stepped back onto the sales floor, she was different. Gone was the nervous young woman who had judged by appearances. In her place stood someone determined to rebuild trust on her first day back. A black teenager walked in with his mother, both dressed in casual sweatshirts. Sophia greeted them with a genuine smile, showed them the newest line of watches, and never once questioned their ability to buy. Upstairs, Elijah watched the interaction through the live customer feedback dashboard, and for the first time, he saw Sophia's score rise steadily above average. She was earning her second chance. Meanwhile, the numbers told their own story. In 30 days, sales had risen by 12%, a remarkable recovery for a brand that had been drowning in scandal. Customer surveys showed satisfaction climbing from 65% to 87%. More strikingly, non-white customers, who had once reported overwhelming feelings of exclusion, now rated their experiences nearly on par with white customers. It was not perfection, but it was progress, tangible and undeniable. The board of Thompson Ventures, initially nervous about the backlash of the viral video, now praised Elijah's swift decisions. Investors who had feared a collapse of the brand were reassured by the surge in revenue and the flood of positive press. Headlines read, "From scandal to standard, Harrington's leads the way in equity." For Alexander Harrington, watching from his home in the Hamptons as he continued cancer treatments. The change was bittersweet. In a letter to Elijah, he wrote, "I built this store to represent excellence, but you have taught me that excellence without equity is failure. I regret that it took me so long to see it. But I am proud that Harrington's may now stand for something greater than chandeliers and marble floors. It may stand for justice. Elijah kept that letter in his desk drawer. A reminder that even legacies could be rewritten. Karen Mitchell, on the other hand, struggled. After her termination, she enrolled in mandatory anti-bias courses and attempted to apply for positions at other luxury retailers, but none would take her. Her name was tied too closely to the scandal. Yet, she attended every session, listened, and learned. Slowly. She began to volunteer with addiction support groups, channeling her pain into service. She was no longer the face of Harrington's, but perhaps one day, she could rebuild a life grounded in humility rather than power. The wider industry could not ignore what had happened. Luxury stores across New York began quietly commissioning their own diversity audits, fearful of being the next target of a viral exposé. Some mocked Harrington's for overcorrecting, but when they saw the 12% revenue bump and the flood of new customers, skepticism turned to curiosity. Was equity not only the right thing to do, but also good business? Elijah believed so, and he was proving it. By the end of the month, the live stream video had reached over 1.2 million views. The hashtag Harrington's shame had morphed into hashtag Harrington's change. As influencers and journalists praised the bold reforms, customers shared their positive experiences online, showing receipts and luxury purchases alongside captions like, "Treated with respect at Harrington's, finally a place that listens." The narrative had shifted. What began as a humiliation had become a movement. For the employees who remained, the change was profound. Jamal Harris, once weighed down with guilt, now stood taller at his post. He had become a quiet leader among the staff, often reminding his colleagues, "We're guardians of fairness now." Jennifer Walsh, who had shone during the mystery shopper test, was promoted to senior associate and tasked with mentoring new hires. She embraced the role with pride, determined to model the kind of service that made every customer feel welcome. Elijah, meanwhile, worked tirelessly from his office above the store, balancing boardroom strategies with floor visits, ensuring that reforms were not just policies on paper, but realities lived every day. He gave interviews to major networks, not boasting about the revenue or the praise, but speaking about his mother, about the humiliation she endured, and about the promise he made as a boy to one day dismantle systems of exclusion. His words resonated because they were not rehearsed. They were lived. Part 6 closes on the store's 30th day under reform. The chandeliers still glittered. The perfume still lingered. But beneath the luxury was something new. Trust. The numbers were up. The staff were learning. And customers of every background walked in with confidence rather than hesitation. Harrington's had not erased its shame, but it had begun to redeem it. Elijah knew the fight was far from over. Systemic change was never a sprint. But as he stood in the boardroom overlooking Fifth Avenue, watching customers come and go without fear or insult, he allowed himself one rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The scars of prejudice remained, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders, etched into the foundation of a store that was slowly, steadily becoming something more than a monument to wealth. It was becoming a model of justice in a place no one had expected to find it. 6 months later. The echoes of that August afternoon had not faded. They had evolved into something larger than anyone could have predicted. Harrington's luxury emporium, once branded with shame, now stood as a symbol of what accountability and reform could accomplish. The numbers spoke first. Revenue had climbed by 30%. Customer satisfaction ratings reached 96%. And, most importantly, the gap between how white and non-white customers rated their experiences had nearly vanished. For Elijah Thompson, those figures were more than metrics. They were proof that justice, when enforced with discipline, could transform an entire system. The chandeliers still glistened. The perfume still filled the air. But the store was no longer a shrine to exclusion. It was a laboratory of equity, and its reputation stretched far beyond Fifth Avenue. Universities requested case studies. Business schools analyzed the turnaround, and civil rights organizations cited it as a model for systemic change in the private sector. Elijah himself was invited to lecture at Harvard, where he stood before a packed auditorium and recounted the story not as a tale of humiliation, but as a blueprint for reform. "The question is not whether bias exists," he told the students, his voice resonant. "The question is whether we will tolerate it, and I assure you, tolerance of injustice is more expensive than its eradication." The applause was thunderous. Back at Harrington's, the reforms had become second nature. Dr. Elena Vasquez continued to oversee the diversity program, which now included quarterly workshops, mentorship programs, and a rotating panel of community leaders who sat on the advisory board. The store's new dashboard, visible online to anyone, displayed real-time customer feedback. It was radical transparency. No more hiding behind polished marketing. If a customer left dissatisfied, the world could see it. And because of that, employees worked harder, listened longer, and treated every guest with the dignity they deserved. Jennifer Walsh thrived in her new role as senior associate, training newcomers with the same kindness she once quietly wished to see from others. Sophia Ramirez, once suspended in disgrace, had become one of the store's top performers. Her name now attached to positive testimonials that praised her warmth and professionalism. Even Jamal Harris, once haunted by his complicity, had been promoted to head of security, where he instituted his own reforms, sensitivity training for guards, community outreach with local schools, and a policy that no one would ever be escorted out without due cause. For Alexander Harrington, whose health had declined further, the transformation of his life's work gave him solace. He visited the store only once more, frail and leaning on a cane, but when he walked through the gleaming doors, customers of every race and background greeted him warmly. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered to Elijah, "I never thought I'd live to see Harrington's as it should have been. Thank you for giving me this gift before I go." Elijah placed a steady hand on his shoulder and replied, "This isn't just your legacy anymore. Alexander, it's ours, and it will outlive us both." Beyond the store, the ripple effects shook the entire luxury retail industry. Competitors scrambled to implement their own equity policies, fearing the wrath of social media and the scrutiny of watchdog organizations. Trade journals ran features with headlines like "The Harrington Effect: How One Scandal Reshaped Retail." Civil rights leaders applauded the precedent, noting that lawsuits had dropped not because complaints were silenced, but because genuine reform had reduced the injustices fueling them. Dr. Marcus Washington of the New York NAACP praised Harrington's publicly, calling it a beacon in an industry too long shrouded in prejudice. Meanwhile, the viral video that had started it all continued to circulate online. By now, it had been viewed over 5 million times, analyzed in classrooms, dissected in think pieces, and even turned into a short documentary. The hashtag Harrington's Change became a rallying cry for activists demanding similar reforms in banks, hotels, and airlines. Elijah often reflected on the irony. What had been intended to humiliate him had instead empowered millions. It reminded him of his mother, of the tears she had once shed in silence. He wished she could have lived to see this, but he carried her spirit in every decision he made. 6 months later, Elijah had not only reformed one store, but 52 others. Thompson Ventures rolled out the Harrington model across its retail portfolio, from Chicago to Los Angeles, Boston to Miami. Each store adopted transparency dashboards, community boards, and training programs. Sales rose across the board, disproving the myth that equity and profit were at odds. Investors were thrilled. communities were supportive, and customers were loyal in a way they had never been before. Elijah's decision to choose reform over revenge had become a national case study in leadership. But the legacy was not only financial, it was personal. Employees who once feared losing their jobs now found themselves part of a mission. Customers who once walked in with hesitation now entered with confidence. And Elijah himself, once a boy humiliated beside his mother, now stood as a man who had rewritten the rules of an industry. In interviews, he often repeated the same line, a mantra born from years of watching injustice. I chose reform over revenge because revenge fixes nothing, but reform changes everything. Part 7 closes with Elijah standing once again in the boardroom overlooking Fifth Avenue. The city below buzzed with its usual chaos. Yellow cabs, flashing billboards, endless crowds. But inside, there was a stillness, a sense of completion. He looked at the live dashboard on the wall, satisfaction at 96%. Equity gaps closed, sales climbing. He thought of his mother, of Alexander, of Sophia, Jamal, and Jennifer, of every customer who had once been told they didn't belong. He whispered softly, "You belong now." And as he turned to leave the office, the story of Harrington's was no longer about chandeliers or watches. It was about dignity. It was about justice. And it was about the power of one man, one choice, to transform not only a store, but an entire system, proving once and for all that, when discrimination is confronted with courage, the legacy that follows is not shame, but redemption. Thank you for watching. Comment where you're from. Subscribe to the channel, and like this video to support more powerful stories.